Some people grow up learning how to manage allowance money. Others grow up learning how to recognize stress in their parents' voices when the mail arrives. If you grew up poor in America, you didn't just grow up without money. You grew up inside uncertainty. And I've watched this pattern for decades. Not from textbooks. Not from surveys. From real people. From business partners. From clients. From young professionals who suddenly started earning six figures but still felt like they were drowning. I've seen crypto millionaires panic over small expenses. I've seen real estate investors hesitate to replace a broken appliance in their own homes. I've seen stock traders obsessively check their portfolios every hour like rent was due tomorrow. Because escaping poverty changes your income. It does not automatically change your imprint. And that's where this conversation begins. Not with investing strategies. Not with side hustles. Not with how to get rich. With the imprint. Because you can increase your income in 5 years. Rewiring what shaped you can take much longer. Poverty is environmental, not just financial. When people hear, grew up poor, they imagine smaller houses, older cars, hand-me-down clothes. That's surface. Poverty is overhearing arguments about rent at night. It's watching a parent choose which bill gets paid and which waits. It's lights getting shut off and everyone pretending it's temporary. It's standing in a grocery aisle calculating totals before reaching the register. It's noticing how gas prices affect mood in the house. You learn early that money is not neutral. It controls atmosphere. Children don't analyze these patterns. They absorb them. And that absorption becomes wiring. If stability is unpredictable, your brain learns vigilance. If resources are scarce, your mind learns to scan constantly. If comfort disappears easily, you assume it always might. That's not weakness. That's adaptation. But here's what most people don't realize. The adaptations that help you survive one environment can quietly limit you in another. Scarcity becomes more than a condition. It becomes a lens. Survival thinking is narrow thinking. When survival is the priority, long-term strategy fades. You focus on today. You optimize for immediate needs. You reduce risk at all costs. And if that survival mode lasts through childhood, it becomes your default setting. So years later, even after promotions, investments, and raises, the patterns remain. You check your bank account repeatedly. You feel uneasy when it dips below a number, even if you're objectively fine. You hesitate before reasonable purchases. You feel guilt after buying something nice. The math says you're stable. But the imprint doesn't respond to math. It responds to memory. And I've seen this over and over again across stocks, crypto cycles, real estate booms, name it. People think wealth is about knowing what to buy. It's not. It's about understanding why you react the way you do. Financial education was never properly taught in school. Let's be honest. If it were, many of our teachers would have built serious wealth themselves. We were taught to find X in equations. But not how to file taxes. Not how compounding really works. Not how to manage risk. Not how to own assets. So most people learn money emotionally before they ever learn it strategically. The fear of going back. For many who grew up poor, there's a quiet fear that never fully leaves. The fear of going back. Back to overdraft fees. Back to eviction notices. Back to borrowing. Back to instability. Even if you now have savings. Even if you own a home. Even if you invest consistently. There's a whisper. This could disappear. That whisper can make you disciplined. But it can also keep you tense. You don't fully rest. You don't fully trust stability. You don't fully enjoy progress. Because stability was never modeled for you. You weren't raised in calm. You were raised in reaction. And the body remembers reaction long after circumstances change. Discipline versus fear. Now let's be clear. Frugality is not a problem. Discipline is not a problem. Caution is not a problem. But there is a difference between discipline and fear. Discipline says, I choose not to overspend because I value investing. Fear says, if I spend, something bad might happen. One is intentional. The other is protective. And I can tell you from years of watching markets, protective thinking rarely builds expansive wealth. It preserves. It doesn't multiply. Hyperindependence and isolation. Another imprint I see often? Hyperindependence. If you grew up watching systems fail, jobs lost, promises broken, support unreliable, you learned early. I'll rely on myself. That builds work ethic. It builds drive. But it can also create isolation. You hesitate to trust partnerships. You avoid asking for help. You carry more than you need to. And in wealth building, collaboration matters. Ownership matters. Strategic relationships matter. But if your early environment taught you that support equals risk, you may resist it, even when it would help you grow. Income rises faster than psychology. One of the biggest surprises for people who escape poverty is this. The paycheck changes faster than the psychology. You might earn more than your parents ever did. You might invest in stocks, own crypto, own real estate. From the outside, you look stable. Inside? Still scanning. Still preparing for collapse. Still bracing. That's the imprint. And until you recognize it, it quietly influences everything. Career moves. Investment timing. Lifestyle upgrades. Even relationships. Not dramatically. Subtly. Repeatedly. But here's the strength. Now listen carefully. Growing up poor does not only create limitation. It creates resilience. Resourcefulness. Appreciation. Delayed gratification. Many of the most disciplined investors I've met came from scarcity. They know how to endure. They know how to sacrifice. They know how to delay reward. That imprint carries power. But strength without awareness can become rigidity. If you only know how to operate in survival mode, you may struggle to operate in stability mode. And stability requires a different skill set. Calm decision-making. Intentional investing. Spending without guilt. Rest without anxiety. Those are learned too. They don't automatically appear when income rises. The real beginning. Escaping poverty is external. Rewiring your relationship with money is internal. And internal work is what separates high earners from true wealth builders. Wealth is not just accumulation. It is psychological stability. There are people making $80,000 who sleep well and invest steadily. There are people making $400,000 who are anxious every day. The difference isn't only numbers. It's awareness. And here on Uncle Weston Invests, we don't just talk about tactics. We talk about structure. We talk about psychology. We talk about ownership. We talk about building something that lasts. Because if you don't master the imprint will quietly master you. And this is only the beginning. Now we move deeper. You've recognized the imprint. Now we talk about reconstruction. Because awareness without reconstruction is just reflection. And reflection alone does not build wealth. Let me tell you something most people don't say out loud. You can make 6 figures and still make decisions like you're broke. Not because you are. But because your nervous system still thinks you are. And if you don't intentionally rebuild your financial thinking, your old wiring will quietly shape your future wealth. I've seen it happen too many times. Talented people. Hardworking. Disciplined. Ambitious. Income rising fast. But mindset stuck in defense mode. And defense mode doesn't scale. Step 1. Redefine what safe means. When you grew up poor, safe meant cash in hand, bills paid this week, no immediate emergency. That's short-term safety. But wealth requires redefining safety. Real safety is a funded emergency reserve, no high-interest consumer debt, consistent investing, insurance protection, multiple income streams. Notice the shift. Safety becomes structural, not emotional. Because emotional safety fluctuates. Structural safety is measurable. You stop asking, "Do I feel okay?" and start asking, "Is my system strong?" That's adult wealth thinking. Step 2. Build systems, not reactions. People who grew up in financial instability often operate reactively. Something happens, respond. Market drops, panic. Car breaks, stress. Expense rises, freeze. But wealth builders operate through systems. Automated investing. Automatic savings. Pre-planned allocations. Clear rules for spending. When your investments are automated, you don't argue with yourself every month. When your emergency fund is defined, surprises don't become disasters. When your portfolio allocation is structured, volatility becomes expected, not terrifying. Systems reduce emotional decision-making. And emotional decision-making is the biggest silent destroyer of wealth. Step 3. Learn to spend without guilt. This is a big one. Some people escape poverty but never learn how to enjoy stability. They feel guilt upgrading their lifestyle. They feel irresponsible taking vacations. They feel uneasy replacing things before they break. That guilt doesn't mean you're disciplined. Sometimes it means your identity hasn't caught up to your reality. Spending intentionally is not betrayal of your past. It is evidence of growth. Now listen, I'm not talking about reckless lifestyle inflation. I'm talking about balanced living. If you invest consistently, save consistently, and plan responsibly, then enjoyment is part of wealth. Otherwise, you're just accumulating numbers with no emotional return. And that becomes another form of scarcity. Step 4. Upgrade financial education. If you weren't taught financial literacy early, it's not your fault. But it becomes your responsibility. Understanding how compound interest actually works, how index funds reduce risk, how tax efficiency affects long-term wealth, how inflation erodes idle cash, how debt can be either destructive or strategic. These aren't optional topics if you want stability. They're foundational. You don't need to become a hedge fund manager. But you must understand the rules of the game. Because money flows toward those who understand structure, not toward those who operate purely on emotion. Step 5. Separate identity from net worth. This one is subtle but powerful. If you grew up poor, money can become identity fuel. You want proof you escaped. Proof you made it. Proof you're different now. So income becomes validation. Net worth becomes comparison. Success becomes visible. But if your identity attaches too tightly to financial growth, you become fragile during downturns. Markets correct. Businesses fluctuate. Income cycles happen. If your worth equals your wealth, volatility will shake you. True financial maturity says, "My investments may fluctuate. My value does not." That stability changes everything. The hard truth about reconstruction. Reconstruction feels uncomfortable. Because survival thinking feels familiar. Even when it's stressful. Calm can feel strange if chaos was normal. Long-term investing can feel risky if short-term cash was once survival. Delegating can feel dangerous if self-reliance kept you safe. But growth often feels unfamiliar before it feels natural. And every stable investor I know went through this phase, where they had to consciously decide, I am no longer operating from fear. Not because fear disappeared, but because structure replaced it. The difference between rich and stable. Let me make something clear. You can be rich and unstable. You can have money and still panic. You can have assets and still feel scarcity. Stability is different. Stability is knowing your numbers, trusting your plan, accepting volatility, spending intentionally, investing consistently, without obsessing, without constantly checking, without bracing. Reconstruction is about building that stability. The psychological upgrade. When reconstruction begins, you notice subtle changes. You stop checking your bank balance daily. You stop panicking at small market dips. You stop hoarding cash excessively. You start thinking in decades instead of months. That shift from short-term defense to long-term design is the real upgrade. Income increases opportunity. But psychological upgrades increase durability. And durability builds generational impact. Why most people stop here? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people escape poverty, increase income, build some assets, and stop. They never fully rewire. They never fully trust stability. They never transition from defense to design. So they live in a permanent middle ground. Better off, but never at peace. And peace is part of wealth. This is where we separate earners from architects. Earners increase income. Architects build systems that outlast income. And in the next part, we go deeper into something rarely discussed: the social shift. Because as your finances evolve, your relationships, circles, and perspectives shift too. And that part? That part catches many people off guard. Good. Now we move from awareness into reconstruction. Because recognizing the imprint is powerful. But if you stop at recognition, nothing changes. Insight without structure becomes reflection. Insight with structure becomes transformation. There's a moment that happens quietly for many people who grew up poor. It doesn't happen when they get their first real paycheck. It doesn't happen when they buy their first car. It doesn't even happen when they cross 6 figures. It happens when they realize, I don't want to live in reaction anymore. That realization is subtle. But it's pivotal. Because survival is reactive. Wealth, real wealth, is intentional. And the shift from reaction to intention is psychological before it's financial. Step 1: define enough. Most people who grew up in scarcity never define enough. They define more. More savings. More income. More protection. But more has no ceiling. And if there's no ceiling, there's no peace. So the first reconstruction question is not, how much can I accumulate? It's, what number creates stability for me? Not fantasy wealth. Not comparison wealth. Your number. For some, it's a 6 to 12-month emergency fund. For others, it's a specific investment milestone. For others, it's a paid-off home. Whatever it is, define it clearly. Because when safety is undefined, fear keeps running. When safety is defined, progress becomes measurable. And measurable progress reduces anxiety. Step 2: replace vigilance with systems. If you grew up constantly monitoring instability, you likely developed financial vigilance. You check. You recheck. You anticipate. Instead of trying to eliminate vigilance, replace it with systems. Automation is psychological freedom. Automatic retirement contributions. Automatic brokerage investing. Automatic savings transfers. When systems are running, your brain doesn't need to micromanage survival. Structure absorbs fear. This is where many people experience their first real sense of calm. Not when they earn more. When they systematize. Because predictability rewires uncertainty. Step 3. Separate safety from identity. Here's a deeper layer. When you grow up without money, achieving financial stability can become your identity. I'm the one who made it. I'm the stable one. I'm the provider now. That identity can feel empowering. But it can also become heavy. If your worth becomes tied to constant financial strength, you'll resist vulnerability. You'll resist slowing down. You'll resist strategic risk. You'll resist transparency about uncertainty. True wealth identity is quieter. It says, I build well. I adjust when needed. I am not my bank balance. Separating safety from identity allows flexibility. And flexibility is long-term power. Step 4. Learn to experience stability. This might sound strange. But many people who grew up poor don't know how to experience stability. They achieve it, but don't feel it. So practice it intentionally. When you hit your emergency fund goal, pause. When you reach an investment milestone, acknowledge it. When your monthly expenses are covered with margin, sit with that reality. Teach your nervous system. This is normal now. Stability must be practiced, not just achieved. Otherwise, you'll keep chasing without absorbing. Step 5. Upgrade gradually, not emotionally. Lifestyle inflation isn't always reckless. Sometimes it's overdue. If you spent years in tight conditions, wanting better is natural. The key is pacing. Upgrade intentionally. Not to prove. Not to soothe. Not to compensate. But to improve quality of life sustainably. Better neighborhood? Better healthcare? Better education for your children? Better time flexibility? Those are structural upgrades. Not emotional ones. When upgrades align with long-term structure, they strengthen wealth. When they align with emotional release, they destabilize it. The difference is intention. Step 6. Balanced generosity. If you are the first in your family to reach financial stability, this part matters deeply. You may feel responsible. You may feel obligated. You may feel watched. Generosity is powerful. But generosity without boundaries erodes stability. And when you destabilize yourself trying to help everyone, you recreate the very environment you escaped. Healthy wealth includes healthy boundaries. You can support without rescuing. You can help without sacrificing your future. You can care without collapsing your structure. That balance is maturity. Not selfishness. The calm wealth identity. After all this, what are we actually building? Not just a larger net worth. A calm wealth identity. Calm wealth doesn't panic at market dips. It doesn't overspend to impress. It doesn't hoard in fear. It allocates. It plans. It adapts. Calm wealth understands. Money is a tool. Not a shield against identity. Not proof of worth. Not insulation from all uncertainty. Just a tool. And when you see money as a tool rather than a survival anchor, you stop gripping it tightly. You use it deliberately. Integrating the past. You don't erase where you came from. You integrate it. Keep the resilience. Keep the gratitude. Keep the discipline. But release the constant alarm. Release the belief that comfort is temporary. Release the assumption that disaster is always near. Release the idea that you must suffer to be safe. Because wealth is not just accumulation. It is the quiet confidence that you are no longer surviving. It is waking up without scanning for collapse. It is making decisions from strategy instead of fear. And for many people who grew up poor, that internal shift is the real victory. Not the car. Not the house. Not the income bracket. The calm. If this resonated deeply, we can go even further into how this mindset affects investing strategy, career trajectory, and long-term generational wealth planning. Now we stop reacting. We stop reconstructing. We stop adjusting. Now we design. Because once your imprint is recognized, once your psychology is reconstructed, once your social environment stabilizes, you're no longer escaping. You're building deliberately. There's a massive difference between someone who earns well and someone who builds intentionally. One reacts to opportunity. The other architects outcomes. This is where most people never arrive. Because survival thinking and reconstruction require effort. Design requires vision. And vision requires calm. From defense to architecture. Early on, your focus was defense. Avoid debt. Build emergency savings. Stop the bleeding. Increase income. Then reconstruction. Automate investing. Learn asset allocation. Control emotional decisions. Upgrade financial literacy. But now we architect. And architecture starts with a simple but powerful question. What do I want my money to do for me long term? Not next year. Not next bonus cycle. But 10, 20, 30 years from now. Designing income streams. If you grew up poor, income probably meant one thing. A job. Clock in. Clock out. Get paid. But wealth design separates income into layers. Active income, what you earn from work. Investment income, dividends, interests, capital gains. Business income, ownership distributions. Asset appreciation, growth over time. When you design intentionally, you stop relying on one source. You start stacking. Not recklessly. Strategically. You don't chase every opportunity. You evaluate alignment. Does this asset strengthen my long-term structure? Or is it emotional excitement? Design removes impulse. The long horizon advantage. One of the greatest advantages for someone who escaped poverty is this. You understand patience. You understand endurance. Now you apply that to investing. Instead of asking, what can flip quickly? You ask, what compounds consistently? Instead of chasing headlines, you build positions. Index funds. Quality businesses. Real estate with cash flow. Strategic diversification. You think in decades. And here's what most people miss. Time is the most underused wealth-building tool. When your strategy stretches across decades, volatility shrinks emotionally. Short-term dips become background noise. Because design always outlasts disruption. Spending by blueprint, not emotion. Design also applies to lifestyle. You decide in advance. What percentage goes to investing? What percentage supports lifestyle? What percentage fuels generosity? What percentage builds opportunity capital? So when income increases, you don't inflate randomly. You allocate intentionally. Lifestyle upgrades happen, but they're planned. Not reactive. Not performative. Planned? That's maturity. Risk becomes calculated. When you were in survival mode, risk felt dangerous. When you reconstructed, you minimized risk. Now, in design mode, you calculate risk. There's a difference. You understand. Market risk. Business risk. Inflation risk. Concentration risk. And you manage them systematically. You diversify. You rebalance. You insure. You maintain liquidity. Risk doesn't disappear, but it becomes managed. And managed risk builds controlled growth. The calm investor. Here's where you know you've evolved. You stop checking constantly. You stop reacting to every headline. You stop comparing portfolios. Because your strategy is clear. Clarity reduces noise. And noise is the enemy of compounding. The calm investor often outperforms the emotional one. Not because they're smarter, but because they're steadier. And steady is powerful. Designing for freedom, not flash. Now let's get honest. Flashy wealth is loud. Cars. Watches. Statements. Freedom wealth is quiet. Time. Choice. Flexibility. Health. When you design intentionally, you realize the real flex is not working because you have to. The real flex is turning down what doesn't align. The real flex is having margin. Margin in time. Margin in money. Margin in energy. Margin reduces pressure. Pressure distorts decisions. And distorted decisions destroy wealth. Generational architecture. This is where it becomes bigger than you. You begin asking, how do I make sure this outlives me? That means estate planning, trust structures, beneficiary alignment, financial education for children, teaching ownership early. Because wealth without education dissolves. But wealth with education multiplies. You don't just leave assets. You leave literacy. You don't just pass down money. You pass down mindset. And mindset sustains assets. The identities shift. At this stage, something subtle happens. You stop saying, I'm trying to make it, and start realizing, I am building something. That shift changes posture. You're not scrambling. You're constructing. You're not chasing. You're allocating. You're not proving. You're planning. That confidence is quiet, but powerful. The reality check. Designing wealth doesn't mean perfection. Markets will fluctuate. Mistakes will happen. Opportunities will be missed. But design absorbs shocks. Because it was built with margin. Margin in liquidity. Margin in diversification. Margin in patience. And margin is what poverty rarely allowed. Now you create it intentionally. You've come a long way. From imprint to reconstruction to social recalibration to strategic design. But there's one final layer. The integration. The part where wealth stops being the focus and becomes the foundation. And that final layer? That's where peace lives. Now we close this the right way. Not with hype. Not with motivation. With integration. Because if you've truly moved from imprint to reconstruction, to social shift, to design, then money is no longer the center of your life. It becomes the foundation. There's a moment in real wealth building that doesn't get talked about enough. It's not when you hit your first $100,000. Not your first million. Not when your income doubles. It's the moment money stops being loud in your mind. When you grew up poor, money was loud. It caused tension, arguments, stress, mood shifts, silence at the dinner table. It controlled the atmosphere. So when you begin building wealth, it's natural that money still feels loud internally. You check accounts often. You monitor investments constantly. You prepare for disaster even when there isn't one. That was survival. But integration is different. Integration is when structure replaces stress. The nervous system finally calms. Escaping poverty changes numbers. Integration changes your nervous system. You no longer panic at normal expenses. You don't feel threatened by market dips. You don't assume every inconvenience is a crisis. Because you built emergency reserves, diversified investments, insurance protection, margin. You didn't just increase income. You increased stability. And stability quiets the body. That's real wealth. From accumulation to alignment. Early wealth building is about accumulation. Build savings. Build credit. Build investments. Build income streams. But integration shifts the question. Instead of, how much more can I make? You ask, does my money align with my values? Does your spending reflect what matters? Does your work align with your energy? Do your investments reflect your time horizon? Does your generosity make sense strategically? Money becomes a tool for alignment. Not proof. Not validation. Not armor. Alignment. The power of boring wealth. There is something powerful about boring wealth. No drama. No constant trading. No emotional roller coasters. No proving. Just steady investing. Steady living. Steady giving. Steady growth. The world glorifies explosive success. But explosive wealth often explodes both ways. Sustainable wealth is almost invisible. It grows quietly while life is lived fully. Vacations without anxiety. Medical decisions without panic. Career changes without desperation. That is freedom. Not flash. Freedom. When fear no longer leads. Let's be honest. Fear may never disappear completely. If you grew up without much, that imprint leaves a memory. But integration means fear no longer leads decisions. Structure leads. Clarity leads. Long-term thinking leads. You look at volatility and say, this is part of the cycle. You look at opportunity and ask, does this fit my architecture? You look at spending and decide, is this intentional? No rush. No panic. No overreaction. That's maturity. Honoring the past without living there. You don't erase where you came from. You honor it. Because growing up with less likely gave you resilience, discipline, gratitude, endurance, awareness. But you no longer operate from alarm. You keep the strength. You release the tension. You keep the discipline. You release the fear. You keep the ambition. You release the desperation. That balance is integration. Generational calm. Here's something powerful. If you build wealth with calm structure, your children may never experience money as loud. They won't see panic about bills. They won't hear arguments about rent. They won't associate finances with fear. They'll associate it with planning. That changes everything. Because generational wealth is not just assets passed down. It's emotional modeling. It's financial literacy taught early. Its ownership is normalized. It's investing explained casually at the dinner table. You're not just increasing net worth. You're redefining normal. The real definition of wealth. Wealth is not a number. It's not a salary. It's not a luxury purchase. It's not a portfolio screenshot. Wealth is sleeping well, making decisions calmly, helping others without harming yourself, working because you choose to, spending without guilt, investing without obsession. It's knowing that if something shifts, you have structure. Structure creates options. Options create dignity. Dignity creates peace. And peace is the final level. The full circle. You started in survival. You moved into awareness. You reconstructed your thinking. You navigated social shifts. You designed strategically. Now you integrate. And at integration, something subtle happens. Money stops being your identity. It becomes your infrastructure. You're no longer trying to prove you escaped poverty. You're building something that outlives you. That's legacy. Not loud. Not flashy. Durable. And durable wealth is powerful. This right here? This is what Uncle Weston Invest stands for. Not hype. Not get-rich-quick energy. Not surface-level tactics. Structure. Psychology. Ownership. Longevity. If this series shifted something in you, then you're not just listening. You're evolving. And evolution compounds faster than interest.